My name is Jeff West. I'm Superintendent at Cape Lookout National Seashore, and I'm here to talk to you about the Lighthouse, Cape Lookout Lighthouse specifically today. And I'm not going to just talk about the history of the lighthouse, although that's pretty interesting. I want to talk about where we stand today and kind of where we're headed with that, just so people know. Lighthouses tend to capture people's hearts and souls. I don't know exactly why. Don't know, but it's true. I'm a Texas boy. I grew up on a ranch in Central Texas. Didn't even think about lighthouses when I was growing up. Could have cared less. But working with the Park Service, I went up to Cape Cod. It was one of my early jobs with the Park Service, and I got hooked. It was like all of a sudden lighthouses, and there's bunches of them up here. And I even wrote a little short booklet. It's a booklet, it's not a book, on the Three Sisters of Nauset, which are up there in Cape Cod National Seashore now. But I really did get hooked on lighthouses, and I've thought about it a lot. I mean, they're just kind of odd buildings, right? Stuck in the most inhospitable places you can imagine to stick a building. But there's more than just that. They're kind of like a sentinel out there in the dark, you know, keeping people away from danger. Maybe that's a piece of it. Maybe it's the solitude of lighthouses, because most of them are not exactly, well, I mean, you know, Boston Harbor and stuff like that, but most of them are in pretty lonely places. The other thing I guess I think about is the toughness of the building. I mean, there's not a lot of buildings you can say exist in a maritime environment for, in this case, what's 163 years, and they're still standing there. So the lighthouse, they started construction on in 1857. Let me back up a little earlier than that. Not our first lighthouse, right? The original Cape Lookout Lighthouse was built in 1812. You know, right along with the War of 1812, right? So we've had a lighthouse out there for a long time. Now that lighthouse was not tall enough, and it wasn't good enough work for the mariners that were trying to use it. So eventually they worked around saying, yeah, well, we need to rebuild the lighthouse out there, and we need to build one taller. And depending on what source you want to cite, this lighthouse is our new lighthouse, the one that was built in 1857, completed in 1859, is 163 to 169 feet tall. Why is there a discrepancy, you might ask? I got no idea. You know, people will talk about where they're measured from and stuff like that. I know that our GIS people put it at 166.34 feet tall. Yeah, and that's pretty precise. It's down to a couple of millimeters, so I got a feeling they're right. Speaking of the GIS thing, this is kind of interesting. You know, we are moving towards, I'm going to come back to the history, I promise, but we are moving towards a rehabilitation lighthouse right now. And one of the concerns, I'm sorry, you know, the engineers are wonderful. Are there any engineers in the crowd? Okay, good. I'll go on with my engineer jokes. Unless some of you are lying, in which case I'll get complaints later, but that's okay. So the engineers who are not dealing with maritime buildings are hilarious. So one of them, who is admittedly from Milwaukee, said to me, he said, so, how are you monitoring the lighthouse? I said, what do you mean monitoring? He said, for movement. And I said, movement? And he said, yes, movement. And I said, you mean like this, or, you know, sinking, or what? He said, in any way, form, or fashion, how are you monitoring the lighthouse? I said, we're not. I mean, you know, that looks straight to me. And he said, well, we're going to require a monitoring program as we move forward on this to determine how much over the years, you know, the lighthouse might have moved. I'm like, okay, what's that going to cost us? He said, once again, the engineers, they put together this really cool program, only going to cost us about $220,000 to monitor the lighthouse. And I'm like, oh no, guys, this still looks good to me. But they said, so I'm just glad the hecklers showed up. They said to me, he said, Yeah, $220,000 thereabouts. Might be a little bit cheaper than that, but we can get you a good monitoring program in there. And I thought, we don't have 220. I mean, I this guy, he deals with federal government all the time, and I'm looking at the wall, and it's like, nope, there's nothing there, not $220,000 anyway. And so I called up our GIS office in Washington, D.C. and said, and the guy who's running it, just, I've been around the Park Service for 40 years now, so, I know people now. They're well, the ones that are still with us that haven't retired or died or something, I know them now, and they're in good places for me to call. So I picked up the phone, called him, and I said, hey, I got to figure out how much this lighthouse has moved, whether it's moving now or not, and if it's sunk in. Can you help me? He goes, sure. No problem at all. We've got all this great, computer stuff, GIS, lasers, and we can tie into NASA, NOAA, and everybody else, USGS, and we can give you precise locations, precise measurements. I said, precise to what? He said 1 or 2 millimeters. I said, okay, that should be it. I don't know exactly what a millimeter is, but I think it's like that. It's pretty tiny. So I said, okay, next problem. How much is it going to cost me? He goes, a couple of grand. We got all the equipment. We'll come out there and just pay for our travel. So I called this engineer back up. I said, hey, we've got a monitoring thing set up. We're probably not going to use your plan. We might have one that's a little bit cheaper. And he said, well, I'll need to see the details on this. And so I got them in touch and stuff. And I came back and said, the engineer calls me up. He goes, wow, I didn't know you guys could do that kind of stuff. But anyway, so they came out and monitored, did all the monitoring. We've actually checked it several times now. And this is the fun part. The lighthouse is not sunk at all since it was originally built. It is 5 centimeters, I don't know, is that what's that, maybe? 5 centimeters off of true from the bottom to the top. And it's not that it's leaning, it was built that way. The light has not moved in 163 years. That's just amazing to me. Now the caveat on that is all the smart people tell me, well, it might have moved a little bit this way or that, but not enough where it's causing any of our issues. So, take us back to the original construction. So, this is kind of fun too. 1856 is when Congress appropriated the funds to build the lighthouse. How much, anybody want to take a stab at how much the lighthouse cost to be built?
$15,000. Yeah.
That's not a bad stab. $15,000? It was $45,000. This is a big lighthouse, 27.5 feet at the bottom and 16 feet up at the top. I mean, it's a big brick lighthouse in the middle of nowhere. So $45,000 is what Congress appropriated in 1856. Just keep that in the back of your mind when I get to the point of what it's going to cost to rehabilitate the lighthouse. But so they get out there, they build the lighthouse. It's great. Everybody thinks it's wonderful. Doesn't have the checks on it right now. Right now, it's just red brick out there. But it's doing the job. It's tall enough. You can be seen from far enough away. Lighthouse is doing its job. The keepers were living in the original 1812 keepers' quarters. If you go out there and look for that today, if you're standing facing the lighthouse and look about 2 dunes over to your left, there's kind of a dune there, and that's where the original keepers' quarters was, 1812 keepers' quarters was. Now, of course, it didn't sit out there by itself, right? You had all kinds of, besides the keeper's quarters, you had some sheds and some storage sheds and a boathouse, and of course, don't forget the privy, that was very important. Things like that. There's other little structures out there, but this is the picture I want you to get. When you're standing over there today and you look north or south, you got trees in the way. There's lots of trees out there, lots of vegetation, everything. If you go up into the lighthouse, that's still a predominant picture. When you look out over the cape, there's a lot of vegetation out there. When this lighthouse was built, y'all, there was nothing but sand and a little bit of seagrass out there. Nothing. Either direction you look. As far as your eye could see was nothing but pretty flat, because the dunes weren't very big when they built it, in either direction. And then, of course, the ocean, as you looked out towards the east, the sound was about 1,300 feet back behind you towards the west. And today, of course, the sound is right up against the summer kitchen over there at the keeper's quarters. We've lost about 1,200 feet of sand on the sound side over there since it was built. So it's changed a lot over there, and change is the nature of the environment, right? It's changed. But imagine it in 1859, you're the first keeper going out there, and there's nothing. I mean, nothing as far as you can see in any direction except for that place out there. It's a lonely station. Now, we think of it like, well, you're only 4 miles from Harper's Island. It's not that bad. Well, 4 miles in a sailboat's a whole lot further than 4 miles in a nice modern motorboat. And Beaufort, which is where you could really get anything back then, was a lot further than that. So it's a pretty lonely station out there. Now, in a few years, they're going to build a life-saving station out there. It was completed in 1888. It was manned in 1888. So there's finally, if you kind of look off towards the south, they'd be able to see another structure out there, the life-saving station, maybe several structures actually, the life-saving station, boathouse, extra boathouse and things like that. Eventually as things begin to pop up over there. Not quite as lonely, a few more people around now maybe, but it's improving. 1873, they built the keeper's quarters. This was meant to be, the assistant keeper's quarters. But the keeper did not want to continue to live in the original 1812 keeper's quarters because it was falling down. The renovations they did were phenomenal on that stuff out there, and it was a constant thing. And any of y'all that have a place out here on the coast know that all you have to do is let your house go a few years without doing anything on it. Pretty soon you're doing a lot on it. So it was a constant thing in the journals that they kept, to see the maintenance and the work that went into those. And the long list of concerns the keepers had that weren't being answered to. Roof continues to leak. Things like that. So it's becoming, over the years, became a more populated place. I have to talk about the Civil War a little bit. So 1863, the Confederate government removed the lighthouse, the Fresnel lens that was up there at the top of it, removed it to put it in storage. Why would they do that? Why would you do such a thing? I take a stab at it. You betcha. They didn't want to give those Federalists out there any help there navigating Cape Lookout Shoals, so they just extinguished the light. They tried to blow it up too. That didn't work out so well. They did blow out about 60 foot of stairs, which was replaced with iron. They replaced it with wooden stairs at first, and then in 1867 they replaced it with iron stairs after the war. But the lighthouse was pretty tough. They put a bunch of dynamite in there in the base of it, tried to blow it up, and it didn't blow up. Lost a little stairs. So, but that lens after the war. A first order Fresnel lens. That's the biggest one that was out there. Now, I have to tell you, I'm from Texas, and I don't speak French. And it looks like Fresnel to me, so every now and then I'll say that Fresnel lens, and people look at me and go, that's pronounced Fresnel. And I said, well, I don't speak French. But anyhow, that big, fancy, expensive lens shipped off to a warehouse in Raleigh during the Civil War. After the war, the Lighthouse Authority got the lens back and sent it to France, and it was 100% restored. And that lived in the lens until it was modernized. Now, or that lived in the lighthouse until it was modernized. They brought it back, put it back up in the lighthouse. And that lens, when it was modernized, the aero beacons were put in there, the DB-20s. They took it out, and the Coast Guard stored it at Portsmouth. That's great. You'd think we'd be able to just run up there, run through the flatbed and pick that lens up, right? Bring it on back to Cape Lookout where it belongs. Yeah, well, no. Somebody else said they wanted the lens. Block Island Lighthouse decided they wanted the lens. And at the time, nobody here wanted the lens, so they shipped it up there, and right now it is the Cape Lookout Lighthouse lens is on display. Actually, not on display; it's in the lighthouse up there. They have another Fresnel lens up there that's on display outside the lighthouse. One of these days we'll get that thing back. Not sure exactly how, but one of these days we'll.
If we get together a really good gang and an 18-wheeler, I think we could go.
That would work. That may be the best way. In fact, gets rid of all the red tape, Congress and Coast Guard and stuff.
Oh.
So anyway, the lighthouse has existed out there and it's done its job. There are a lot of people that say, well, lighthouses really aren't needed anymore. We've got modern navigation equipment that pinpoints our location, takes into account current and wind and everything. There's no way anything can go wrong. And to those folks, I'd say, you may visit us the next time a boat runs aground out there and help us get it off. It is true that for the most part, the commercial vehicles, that the reason lighthouses were built in the first place, they don't run aground on the shoals out there at the Cape anymore. They just don't do it. They go way too far out. They're very, very cautious about it. So the likelihood of the lighthouse being needed for them is pretty small. However, people like me and other folks I know who do go offshore or even around the Sound, that lighthouse does mean a lot, and it still helps in navigation. Perhaps not so much the commercial activities as much as the recreational or recreational fishing activities and things like that, but it's still important and still means something. It's still something that people connect with. So I think the lighthouse serves an important purpose. It's a little bit more complex in running it today. So the Coast Guard actually maintains the light. So let's talk about the light for a minute. I did not authorize anybody to put the LED light that's up in there. That was not the Park Service decision, wasn't my decision. So if anybody's here to talk to me about why in the world did we do that, wasn't me, it's the Coast Guard. The power line that's laid from Harper's Island across the Sound all the way over there began to fail in 2012 when they started having issues with it. And there were enough cable bundles within that big cable that they were able to figure out ones that still work, but it was failing. It continued to fail, continued to have issues. And they came to us in about 2015 and said, look, can you guys provide some kind of power source over there? They do, we ran generators and started doing solar quite a bit. We did a solar design over there for a solar system that would power the lighthouse. And they said, okay, we're going to be able to put up this nifty new LED bulb that's as bright as the sun if you're looking at it and you're standing right next to it. That was a joke. I'm sorry. It's not. It doesn't look like it's as bright as those big arrow beacons that were in there. And I lived here when they were still in there, and I can remember them flashing through the windows at night. The new light does not flash through anybody's windows at all. But if you're looking at it, you can see it. If you're looking in that area, it is pretty bright and obvious. But it does not have that sweeping, to me, comforting halo as it came about that the old light had. So there were a lot of people that were upset about that light being replaced. As I understand it, the old kerosene fired lamp, when it went out and they replaced it with the electric lamps, people weren't happy with that either. So I wasn't here then at all. I wasn't even alive then, so I can't claim to know anything about it. Anyhow, so Coast Guard still maintains the light. We supply the power to it, and we are supposed to maintain the building. They very quickly and intelligently signed over the building to the National Park Service. And, big ceremony and everything. Thank you very much. Good luck and stuff. Incidentally, probably want to look at that pretty quick because she's about to fall down. Wasn't true. It was a joke. But maintaining structures over there when you have a crew in a place, it's just like any of the old Coast Guard stations. When you have a crew over there, you got bodies to work on things, and you got bodies to work on things all the time. You know, not do anything, boys. Got something for you to do. Scrape paint, place those roof panels up there, pour concrete, whatever it is. You got bodies to do things. It's not the case anymore. It hadn't been the case in a long time. So that lighthouse was automated in 1950. Now, briefly, after the Coast Guard station at the Cape closed in 1982, they put a crew back over at the lighthouse. The lighthouse station was reactivated briefly for a couple of years until they had everything nailed down with the changeover to Fort Macon and everything, and they were sure everything was going to function without a problem. But pretty much, since 1984, that lighthouse has been on its own over there with only occasional repairs and things. Park Service gets it signed over in 1992, and our initial inspection identified a lot of issues with the lighthouse, and we went through and did a lot of work on the lighthouse. I'm going to qualify the work as being surface work. It looked good. What didn't necessarily take care of any in-depth issues. And by in-depth issues, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So part of the problem with the lighthouse is it's a masonry structure, right? Brick and concrete with a whole bunch of metal stuck into that brick and concrete. And if you ever look at old masonry structures that have metal pieces in them, if those are, my fingers are the bricks, and my other fingers over here in this right hand are the metal, and they're stuck in there. As metal begins to rust, it does this. It starts lifting and changing and breaking things that are masonry. We've got one section of metal in there that when it was new over at the lighthouse, when it was new, it was a 1/4 inch thick. It's now 1/2 inch thick, and the cracks around the masonry are very obvious. That's just one example. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of those examples in the lighthouse right now. Every single stair that goes into the wall at the lighthouse is embedded, just like I just described, in the brick, and every single one of them is rusting, causing that spalling to occur with concrete. The cross beams at each of the landings, of the 7 landings that are in the lighthouse, each of those are embedded in there, and they're all rusting. The work that the Coast Guard did back in the 80s to reinforce the top of the lighthouse, they embedded all of that metal into the upper structure, the upper masonry structure, and that's all rusting and cracking now too. So, and by rusting, I mean in some cases to the point where the metal is no longer structurally sound. So every year we would do inspections of the lighthouse to make sure it's safe for people to go in it. And 2008, they closed the lighthouse down because of concerns. 2010, they addressed those concerns, opened it back up. It was open for a couple of years. 2015, we closed it down again for concerns, safety concerns in the lighthouse. 2017, we opened it back up. Of course, then we had coronavirus hit us. We shut it down, didn't open it for 2000. When did that hit us? It's all 20. 2020 is shut down. January of 21, we went to do our annual inspection before the season got here, thinking maybe that 21 would be able to reopen the lighthouse in some form or fashion. And the inspectors went over there and said, you need to go look at this. And so we ended up bringing a structural engineer in to take a look at the lighthouse, and they said, we recommend that you do not open it until these things are repaired. At that time, we're in the early throes of doing the the Lighthouse renovation project and lining out what that was going to look at. And so we got with the Leolio, the design firm, and said, look, here are the safety concerns that we brought up. Are these going to be addressed as a part of the project? And they said, well, yeah, absolutely. They actually even brought in their structural engineers then to take a look at things from that aspect. The good news when it comes to Lighthouse is all of the main components of the Lighthouse are structurally sound. Do they need some repair work? Yes, they do. The bad news is that some of those, what we would consider to be secondary structural things, like the stairs, I mean, you can still get up there. There are some structural issues there. There's some safety issues there. Some of the floor plating is separated at the landings, and they're tripping hazards. Certainly the main beams that support those landing areas need to be repaired. The masonry that holds those beams in. The center column, which is a cast iron center column that runs almost the entire length of the structure, that's in great shape. And that, of course, holds the center part of the stairs. Some of the rivets that go into those stairs are deteriorating. Easy fix. Some of the things they discovered is that when the windows were replaced in the 1970s, they did not replace them to historical standards. Granted, it is not always the best thing to do, to replace things to the historical standard. Now, we're required to take a very hard look at that in the National Park Service. So when we do renovation to historical structure, we try to do it like it was built, as close as we can. We might substitute modern materials in some ways, we might not. But the question is, did the Coast Guard care in 1968, 1970s? And the answer is no, they did not. They just put in windows. They rip the old ones out, put the new ones in. The problem with the new ones is water comes right underneath them. There's no way to keep the water out the way that they're constructed. It's the darndest thing I've ever seen. So we've got water intrusion coming in the building. That's another problem from the windows. The original ventilation system was very effective. If you think about it, the Lighthouse kind of looks like a big smokestack, right? And it does heat up. And it will draw air from the bottom, through the venting at the bottom of the Lighthouse, all the way through the top. You can even feel the breeze in there. You can feel it right now because some of the windows are broken out at the top. The ventilation system, the way it's supposed to work, would have done the same thing. Well, over the years, countless storms have bent the copper of the ventilation system. So it's a countersink twisting ventilation system. You could line up the holes from the outside to the inside, and if you wanted to draw really well, you could line all the holes up. There's 7 of them up at the top, around the very top of the Lighthouse, and it worked very well. Now they've been damaged so many times you can't even turn them anymore. A couple of them will turn, kind of. So the ventilation system needs to be rehabilitated as well. The panes need to be replaced up the top, and a lot of those panes date back to the early days of Lighthouse. We think some of them probably are original. So that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1850, late 1858, early 1859. They were put in place. They've been there ever since. But that's some serious glass, and they've stood up to a lot of hurricanes. Some of them haven't. We've lost some panes up there, and they have not been replaced. Most of the structure at the top needs to come off. Basically, the whole top, the metal top from the retention ring up the top above it needs to come off and be taken apart, completely rehabilitated, parts fabricated to replace the pieces in them, and then brought back and then put back on top. That's what we should do with all stuff. Lighthouse needs to be painted too. Spent a lot of money trying to understand the mistakes we've made on, not just us and the Coast Guard, made on painting. If you have a masonry structure and you seal the outside, make it impervious to water, that's great. That's what you want to do. But you also want a type of covering, a type of paint, in this case, that also will breathe. In 1873, they were using a lime paint, lime-based paint. Worked great. Breathed all 1873 is when they decided to put the checkered stripes on the lighthouse. But it would breathe. Water moisture could pass right through that paint, no problem. Now you had to repaint it every 2 or 3 years because it just didn't last long. Well, we're a lot smarter these days, right? We said to ourselves, we got paint for the last 40 years. We put that stuff on there. Good epoxy kind of stuff. Put that on there, it'd be good. Weren't thinking about the fact that masonry has to breathe. If the water gets into a masonry structure and cannot remove itself, cannot be removed, it will cause the brick and the mortar to deteriorate. If you go in the lighthouse today, or any time in the last couple of years, there's a fine red dust there, and that's brick dust, and it's from deteriorated bricks. The mortar itself in between the bricks is also deteriorating. As a matter of fact, it kind of looks like being in a cave in some place. If you're in a cave, you've got a stalactite dripping from the ceiling. That's kind of what it looks like. So, and that's lime being leached out of that mortar, which causes the mortar to be weaker. Anyway. And I'm no structural engineer, y'all, this is what they tell me, but it sure stands to reason, and it looks like it when you're there looking at it. So at some point in time, over many courses, the lighthouse got paint that was impervious to water vapor passing through it. Kept the water out on the outside too, but it also kept the water on the inside in, which is bad for the structure, and continues to be bad for the structure. So we spent a lot of money getting a study on how to remove all those layers of paint and take it all the way back to the brick, which is what we're going to do. And then we're going to repaint it with one of these. Also, it's a modern paint, but it's designed to allow masonry structures to breathe. Over time, we can actually learn from the mistakes we make in the past, but we have to look at the mistakes and be honest about them if we're going to learn from them. And I hope that's what's happening now. So we're going to, overall, here's what we want to do over the lighthouse right now. We, as in the folks here in the park, want a total renovation of the lighthouse. If we can do a total renovation of the lighthouse right now, where it stands today, repair it, put it back like it ought to be, basically like it was when it was built in 1859. The lighthouse will sit there without any maintenance other than painting for about another 50 to 60 years, which would be the long-term, cheapest way to do things. Initially, what they wanted to do is, we'll give you the money to paint it. And I said, okay, well, let me herd that pig out there in the arena and put some lipstick on it, because that's all we're doing. It does not solve any of the problems that we've got over there. And it would be stupid and it would be a lie to say that we've done something to protect the lighthouse when in fact we haven't. We've been negotiating ever since on how much money we can get for the lighthouse. Right now we've got about $8 million to put towards lighthouse renovations. As near as I can tell, that's about $8 to $10 million short of what we need. I've asked the company that did the original estimates for us to go back in and look at the estimates and try to make them as correct as they can, given our current situation with inflation and things like that. I mean, if any of you have done any repair work or anything like that on your houses of late, it ain't cheap. Not getting any cheaper. Everybody, I got a call the other day, hey bud, no, you're doing that work on your house. Hey, wood's coming down. And I said, yeah, a little too late for the wood part. I got the wood, now it's all the other stuff I need, it's just going up. Well, it's the same thing any work we do over there. And anybody in here work for the federal government? Besides me? How familiar are we with federal contracting law? Yeah, federal acquisitions regulations, they call it the FAR because it is far out. No, it's the legal framework we have to use in order to contract with somebody, right? The federal acquisition regulations guide how we contract out for things, and they drive me absolutely nuts. So I cannot contract with a local contractor to do work. Can't do it. I cannot go to a local contractor on a big project and say, hey, I'd like to do this job. Here's what it is. You want to put in a bid on it, would you? No. It has to go out on the broad network that the federal government uses to announce that we've got a potential work. And we put out something called a proposal for bids, or a request for proposal. Well, it goes by a couple different things depending on what it is. Regardless, we got to advertise it. And there's preferential treatment. If you are I'm going to start out with women. I like women, and so I'm not saying anything bad here, but if you're a woman-owned company, if you are a minority-owned company, if you are a veteran-owned company, if you're a small company, especially if you're a veteran, woman, military, retired veteran, small company, you are going to get preference in the bidding process. It does not matter if your company is a dishwasher cleaning company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You're going to get preference. If you bid on this contract, you might get it. Well, immediately when you get this contract, you can do all these add-ons that are available to you in the federal contracting system. There's remoteness factor. You're going to have to hire a subcontractor who can actually do the work. So you'll probably contact people here in the local area who actually do the work and hire them on as subcontractors. And when you're done with there's a remoteness factor. Did I mention the remoteness factor? That's 30%. So if you've got a $1 million contract, you automatically get another $300,000 on it because of the remoteness factor. Anyway, it goes on, and it drives me absolutely crazy because how much of that $16 to $18 million project is fluff, and how much is actual work. I can actually tell when it's all said and done. We get the final, when we get to a Class B estimate, I'll be able to tell how much is fluff and how much is actual work. But my suspicion is that about 60% of what we get out of there will be actual work, and the rest that we pay for is all the stuff that's added on. Which just kills me, because there is nobody standing out there that wants to give me $18 million to rehabilitate that lighthouse. Nobody. So it's something that we're working on right now to get enough money to rehabilitate the lighthouse. The $8 million that we do have, we will spend judiciously, and we will get everything we can get done. It's not going to be enough to do what we need to do to fully protect that lighthouse. It's not going to stop us. We're going to keep working at it. There's some other avenues and stuff like that, but it's going to be hard. But I think it's also worth it, right? That lighthouse means a lot to this area. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to think if I've ever looked at any kind of promotional materials about Carteret County that did not have the lighthouse on it. I don't think I've ever seen anything. There might be, but I don't think so. Anyhow, so that's kind of a brief overview of the history of the lighthouse and the rehabilitation plans for the lighthouse. So the keeper's quarters is open. That's open 7 days a week. We've got at least one, usually 2 volunteers over there staffing that. You can go out there and walk around the base of the lighthouse and look up at it and stuff like that. I mean, there's still stuff to see. That museum at the keeper's quarters is worth it. One of the other things that we're struggling with is where the water is now, because it is right. So there used to be a coal house that was out there before Hurricane Isabel took out the coal house, scattered coal and broken piece of concrete everywhere. But now it is right up to the summer kitchen. The sound side, high tide, is within feet of the summer kitchen. Now we're taking a bunch of Jersey barriers and placing them out there to keep impacts from waves hitting the summer kitchen until we can get a project over there to. We've got two things in the works. You know, we're working on the EA right now to dredge Hardin's Inlet. We will use some of the materials in a beneficial manner to protect that beach area around the lighthouse, and then we'll put a living seashore, living
Shoreline.
what?
Shoreline.
Shoreline. That's what I'm looking for. A living shoreline in front of that area over there to help protect it further. That's kind of the game plan right now. As far as long-term flooding over there, that's one of the higher places of the island right there, which is interesting. But the erosion is what's getting us right now.
Yeah.
So, you know, the one beauty of Cape Lookout that you do not have with Cape Hatteras, for instance, is that we are a completely natural barrier island. We have as much accretion as we have erosion over there. So while the island may be eroding in some places, it is accreting sand in others. We're building up in others. The change is part of that nature. You know, when Barton's Inlet actually blew through there in the first place, I love looking at the aerials. We've got some great aerials from the 30s and the 40s showing that. I mean, Barton's Inlet was a narrow little cut going through there, and now it's 3/4 of a mile wide. So, you know, there has been a lot of change over there. It continues to change. Hurricane Florence was a big eye-opener for me when it came to overwash. So our beaches, you know, oh my goodness, look, the beaches are gone. The beaches are gone. Wait, Chicken Little. You know, the sky is falling. But lo and behold, not only did the beaches come back, but all that sand washed back all the way across the island, built up the back parts of the island and the marsh. So it did exactly what a barrier island typically does. There is a lot of sand out there to transport. And so beaches eroding on the oceanfront side don't concern me too much, except in a few places where they continue to, like where the old Long Point cabins are. There's nothing that's filling in there. But for us down there on the south end, that's accreting. So we're in pretty good shape there. In 1960s, the Scouts planted the pine trees over there, and so the pines have taken off on that far end of the island pretty significantly. I mean, they like the environment over there; they're doing great.
And so that's probably helped the barrier island not be a barrier island as much.
So no, so I don't think they've. Here's what I think we've gotten from those trees. I think we'd probably be what we are today, whether the trees were there or not. But the trees do provide some level of protection to the buildings. We may have lost more buildings than we had if those trees weren't there. That's my thinking of it. As far as the ocean overwash goes, it's still occurring. Now we're losing some pine trees. As the salt intrudes upon them more, they cannot stand constant inundation of salt. The occasional bit, it'll hurt them for a little while, but they usually come back. But there are some areas now that are so inundated that the pine trees are drying up.
So you have a ghost forest?
You can't call it.
Not as bad.
Yeah, not quite. So we've got edges of the forest that are going ghosty on us.
Okay.
There are 3 Coast Guard stations within Cape Lookout National Seashore. Portsmouth, and then at the far south end of North Core Banks, there was one near Ophelia Inlet, and then the one down here at the Cape. So you had 3 stations, and they all, except for that middle one, started their lives as life-saving stations. So they've been around for a while. Eventually, they were all connected with telegraph, and then later on telephone. Now, you know how well things work around here when there's storms and things. So that broke down all the time, and in the 1940s, the station that was on the south end of North Core Banks shipped their truck up to Portsmouth Village because the truck was useless to them because of all the cut-throughs. They couldn't drive it anywhere. It was just sitting there. So, you know, there's lots of things that have changed with them. Now, The Coast Guard also, and the Life Saving Service before them, patrolled on a regular basis. You know, those longing patrols and stuff like that. Back during the life saving days, they had stations they had to punch in at too, to make sure that they were out there really doing their patrols and stuff. I don't know if it was cold and miserable out there, if they were just walking like this and not looking, but at least they punched in. But there were regular patrols, and there was also telegraph. So the life-saving, the Lighthouse had a radio beacon in it. In fact, the summer kitchen that we think was the summer kitchen today was actually the battery generator room for the beacon that broadcasts the electronic signal to ships that there was a shoal here. This is Cape Lookout. Look out. And of course, for a long time, there was also a lightship that was posted out there on the shoals till 1938 or 9. So, you know, there were multiple things to keep them away from it. Now, why would you get any closer to the shore? Is a really good question. You know, there's a shoal that comes out, and we're not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. Hatteras took down its fair share of ships too. Diamond shoals. So why would you get so close in? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is, and this was a lot more frequent than it is today, storms blow you there. And about all you had to know about it, that you were getting into a bad place, was when, one, you all of a sudden start picking up that radio beacon, or two, you saw the light, and you know, you're thinking to yourself, I do not want to go towards the light. But that's what's happening, because the storm's blowing you there. Now, if you have a breakdown of some kind, whether it's a rudder that's afoul or that's broken and somehow, a mechanical breakdown, that could have also gotten them in trouble into the shore.
I was reading, and my husband knows all about steam and all that stuff, but when they changed the steam, a big wave could come in and put the fire out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely truth.
Yeah.
Yep.
I never thought of that.
So there were lots of reasons you could still get in trouble, even though you know, I do not want to get over there that close to that shoal. You could anyway. And it must have been an awful feeling when you were on a ship. You're a captain or a mate or a deckhand on a ship, and you know, because you know, you're out there in the ocean. The ocean is a live and living thing. You can hear waves and stuff like that, but they don't sound like waves breaking on a shoal. And then all of a sudden you're hearing, wait a minute, what ho? and if it's light out enough, here's the other thing you don't think about. Out there on the ocean, if it's blowing, even if it's daylight and stuff, sometimes you can't see because of the water vapor that's out there. I mean, it can be a spooky environment, but oftentimes I've read so many accounts where they knew they were in trouble, but they thought they had time, right up until they didn't. What's that sound? Is that a wave breaking on a shoal? Uh-oh, crack. And the Coast Guard is wonderful at responding to boat wrecks. So flares were often shot by boats that ran aground before they had radio capabilities, radio and stuff. But the Coast Guard had numerous ways of getting boats in. So, you know, the way we think of it goes back to the days of life saving service, where, you know, eight strapping men would grab a hold of this boat. And
How far did they go? Were there one station between them, or they were just, you had to pull them all the way from the Coast Guard station?
Well, the boathouses were eventually they were separate from the stations themselves. The original stations, the boathouses were part of they were just right there. And some of the stations were located where it was nothing. It was a ramp out into the water. Portsmouth, if you ever get up there, easy to launch at Portsmouth. But even at Portsmouth, they had a second boathouse built eventually. At Cape Lookout, they eventually built a boathouse that was close to the water, but with the advent of motor launches, 1915 thereabouts, a lot of times they had boats right down there off of the dock. So they actually go to the dock, drop it in there, and go up that way. But I just can't imagine getting in a boat with 7 of my best friends and rowing it out through the surf. But by golly, they did.